My son-in-law was on the phone with his brother when I heard it. The old man's losing it, he said. Amy's already mentioned power of attorney. We just have to wait him out. That house alone is worth over $500,000. I walked back to my workshop, sat down at my workbench, and smiled. Not because it was funny, because I finally understood exactly what I was dealing with. My name is Frank Mercer. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent the better part of 4 decades building things. Houses, mostly. I started as a framing carpenter in my 20s and worked my way up to running my own general contracting company out of Buda, Texas. Built close to 200 homes in the hill country before I sold the business and retired at 60. I know how structures work. I know which parts are load-bearing and which ones are just there for appearances. Turns out that knowledge applies to more than just houses. The property on Creekside Lane wasn't fancy. 4 bedrooms, a detached garage workshop I'd converted myself, an acre of live oaks backing up to a dry creek bed. I'd bought it in 2004 for $310,000 and watched the Austin market do what Austin markets do. By the time any of this happened, it was worth somewhere around $570,000, depending on which Zillow algorithm you believed. I'd paid it off completely in 2019. No mortgage, no liens, nothing. Just a deed with my name on it. My daughter had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness. Those are both good qualities, right up until someone teaches you how to weaponize them. Amy was 35 when all this started. Bright, capable, the kind of woman who could have done anything. She worked remotely, doing marketing for a software company. Decent job, decent income. On her own, she was someone I was proud of. Then she married my son-in-law. Derek came into our lives 6 years ago, through a mutual friend of Amy's. He was 34 at the time, polished in that car salesman way that makes you want to like someone even when your gut is telling you to keep your wallet close. He sold commercial insurance, which he described as a relationship-driven industry, which I later understood meant he was good at being likable, right up until he didn't need to be anymore. He drove a truck that was too expensive for his income and wore boots that cost more than my first month's rent. He called me Frank from the first handshake, which I didn't mind, and then, slowly, started calling me old man as a joke, which I also didn't mind at first, and then very much minded later. They married 3 years after they met. Nice wedding out at a ranch in Dripping Springs. I paid for half of it, which I offered to do because I wanted to, and which somehow became the template for how our financial relationship worked going forward. The first year they rented an apartment in South Austin. Then Derek's commission structure changed, or so he said, and things got tight. Amy called me on a Tuesday evening in March, and by Friday they were moving boxes into my guest bedroom. Temporarily, she said, just until they got back on their feet. 6 months, tops. That was 3 years ago. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. The first year wasn't terrible. They cooked dinner sometimes. Derek helped me restain the back deck. Amy and I would have coffee on Sunday mornings and talk about things the way we used to before she married someone who seemed to need her full attention at all times. There were good stretches. I held on to those stretches longer than I should have, like a man gripping a rope that's already fraying. The shift was gradual. These things always are. Derek started treating the house like a property he was planning to renovate, moving furniture without asking, suggesting I didn't need the workshop space and could just use the garage instead. Once he mentioned, casually, over dinner, that the master bedroom really was too large for just one person. I laughed it off. He wasn't laughing. Amy started speaking to me differently. Not cruel, never overtly cruel, but with a careful patience people use when they're managing someone they've quietly decided is less capable than them. She'd ask twice if I remembered things. She'd glance at Derek when I said something, that half-second check for his reaction. She stopped asking my opinion about anything that mattered and started asking it only about things that didn't. The comments came wrapped in concern, the way they always do. Dad, have you thought about whether this house is too much to maintain on your own? Dad, a financial advisor told us a lot of retirees get taken advantage of by contractors who see them coming. I'd spent 40 years as a contractor. I'd built half the houses in a 3-county area. But sure, Derek's work situation had improved on paper, but somehow never improved in reality. He leased a newer truck, a $58,000 extended cab, and parked it in my driveway because the garage was full of Amy's overflow furniture. He joined a golf club. They took a trip to Cabo that Amy posted about under the caption, "Finally breathing again." The rent they were paying me was zero. Utilities, groceries, internet, lawn service, all in my name, all on my card. I ran the numbers one evening last winter. 3 years of housing at market rate for Buda, Texas, conservatively, worked out to about $186,000. Add utilities, add the various loans, add the $12,000 I'd given them for Derek's business development fund, which had produced no visible business and no visible development. The number climbed past $230,000. For the privilege of feeling like a guest in my own home, I hadn't said anything. I'm not proud of that, but I want to be honest about it. I hadn't said anything, because Amy was my daughter, because I kept thinking the situation would correct itself, because I was raised to believe you help family without keeping score. That belief served me well for 60 years. It stopped serving me the night I walked in from the backyard and heard Derek's voice carrying through the laundry room window. He was standing on the side porch, phone to his ear, talking to his brother in that easy, unguarded way people talk when they think they're alone. The old man's losing it a little, honestly. Amy's noticed it too. She's already mentioned power of attorney as something we should look into, just to be safe. I think it's smart. Once that's in place, a lot of things get simpler. A pause, while his brother said something. Yeah, exactly. We're not going anywhere. And that house, Zillow's got it at 570. We just have to wait him out. I stood in the laundry room for about 10 seconds. Then I walked quietly to my workshop, sat down on my stool, and picked up the piece of walnut I'd been working on. I want to tell you about the woodworking, because it matters to this story. I started it about 5 years ago, after I sold the contracting business. It was something to do with my hands that didn't involve managing other people's problems. Cutting boards first, then small boxes, then furniture. I had a bandsaw, a lathe, a planer, and more chisels than any reasonable man needs. My workshop smelled like sawdust and tung oil, and when I was in there, the world organized itself into simple problems with precise solutions. Wood has grain. Work with it, you get something beautiful. Work against it, you get splits and tears. People aren't that different, it turns out. I sat at my workbench and thought about what I'd just heard, the way I used to think about a building spec. Not emotionally, structurally. What were the load-bearing elements? What could hold weight? And what was just trim? 2 years earlier, I'd done something that now made a lot more sense in retrospect. I'd visited an estate attorney named Patricia Holloway in Austin on my accountant's recommendation, told her I wanted to make sure my affairs were organized. We updated my will, revised my living trust, clarified the language on all my property deeds, and reviewed the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts. At the time, it had felt like routine maintenance, the same reason I serviced my truck every 5,000 miles whether or not anything felt wrong. Now it felt like I'd been reading the grain of the wood all along. I picked up my phone and sent Patricia a text. Need to schedule a meeting, some updates to discuss. No urgency, but soon. She replied the next morning with a Thursday appointment. Perfect. I didn't change my behavior. That's important. I didn't get cold, didn't make pointed comments, didn't give any indication that anything had shifted. I had breakfast with Amy on Saturday, like always. I let Derek tell me about his golf game. I asked polite questions. I listened. I watched. And what I saw now watching without the filter of hoping I was wrong, was clarifying. Derek went through my refrigerator like it was community property and never once bought groceries. Amy had stopped using the word temporarily about their living situation sometime in the second year and had never replaced it with any other word. The guest room they occupied had my name on the mortgage and their furniture, their artwork, their Amazon boxes stacked in the corner. Derek had parked a second vehicle, a car he was flipping for a friend, in my backyard for 4 months without asking, and somewhere in that house, my daughter had apparently been discussing putting me under power of attorney. I was not losing it. My mind was, and remains, sharp enough to run a multi-million-dollar contracting operation, which I did for over 2 decades. But I understand the strategy. If you can establish a narrative that the older person is diminished, confused, maybe a little unstable, you create conditions where other decisions become easier to justify. It's not a new play. It's just ugly when it comes from your own child. Patricia's office was on the 4th floor of a building off Congress Avenue, high enough to see the Capitol Dome if you stood at the right window. She was in her late 50s, unhurried, the kind of attorney who'd built her practice on people who came to her with exactly this kind of problem. I sat across from her that Thursday afternoon and laid it out plainly. My daughter and son-in-law had been living in my home for 3 years without paying rent or contributing to expenses. I'd overheard my son-in-law discussing power of attorney with his brother as a step toward controlling my assets. I wanted to review my current documents and discuss what I wanted changed. She didn't flinch. She'd heard variations of this story more times than she could count. We spent 2 hours going through everything. The living trust was solid. The property deed on Creekside Lane was clear. My name only. No additions in any subsequent paperwork. Good. She pulled up the existing will. Amy was named primary beneficiary across everything, which had made sense 3 years ago and made no sense now. We revised it. My retirement accounts, the rental duplex I owned in Kyle, the remaining proceeds from the business sale, and any future sale of the primary residence would go to 3 recipients: my brother in Midland, a scholarship fund I mentally designated for trade school students, and the animal shelter, where I'd adopted my dog 7 years ago. Amy was removed entirely. "Is that final?" Patricia asked, not questioning me, just making sure I understood the weight of it. "She chose her husband's plan over her father's dignity," I said. "That's final." Patricia made notes. What else? There was one more thing. Derek had come to me 14 months earlier with a story about a business opportunity, a commercial insurance book of business he could buy from a retiring agent. He needed a co-signer on a $28,000 business loan to make the purchase. I'd agreed, because Amy had asked me to, because it was supposed to be a sure thing, and because I was still operating on the assumption that these were people acting in good faith. The business had produced modest income for about 6 months. Then Derek said it was restructuring, which appeared to mean it had stopped generating revenue while the loan payments continued. Patricia reviewed the co-signer documents. "You can petition to be released from co-signer obligation under changed circumstances," she said, "particularly if you can document the deterioration of your relationship with the primary borrower and establish that you entered the agreement under materially different relational circumstances. It's not automatic, but it's viable. What's the timeline?" Bank notification, review, re-evaluation of the primary borrower's creditworthiness, roughly 3 to 4 weeks. Then let's start the paperwork now. I drove home along 183 as the hill country turned gold in the late afternoon light, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Clarity, the kind that comes when you stop arguing with what's true and start working with it. That evening, after dinner, I went out to my workshop and worked until almost midnight, not avoiding them, just thinking, with my hands occupied, the bandsaw humming, the smell of cedar filling the space. I was cutting pieces for a blanket chest I'd been planning for months. Sides, bottom, lid, dovetail joints, hand-cut the slow way. There's a satisfaction in cutting a dovetail by hand that no machine replicates. It requires patience, precision, and an understanding that if you rush it, the whole piece fails. Some plans work the same way. 3 weeks later, I sent my son-in-law and daughter a certified letter through Patricia's office. I'd been advised to formalize it this way: a paper trail, a record of every communication from that point forward. The letter was simple. It outlined that, effective immediately, I was establishing formal rental terms for their occupancy of the Creekside Lane property. Market rate for a 4-bedroom home in Buda, Texas, was $2,850 a month. I was offering $2,400, below market, a courtesy. Payment due on the 1st of each month. If they preferred not to pay rent, they had 30 days to arrange alternative housing. I wasn't home when the letter arrived. I was at my brother's place in Midland, helping him with some fence repairs. My phone started ringing at 11:47 in the morning on a Thursday. I let it ring. By evening, I had 14 missed calls. 9 from Amy, 5 from Derek. I listened to the voicemails in order. Derek went from confused to angry in about 3 messages. Amy's calls moved through shock, hurt, and something that sounded less like genuine pain and more like a coordinated response. The 4th voicemail was them together. Amy's voice up front, Derek audible in the background, coaching her. I called Amy back on the 2nd day. Not Derek. Amy. Dad. Her voice was carefully controlled. What is this? What's happening? You've been living in my house for 3 years without paying rent or contributing to the household. I've calculated the market value of that arrangement at approximately $186,000, not counting loans and other expenses. I'm now asking for rent at below market rate. That seems straightforward to me. You're acting like we're strangers. We're family. Family is a relationship built on mutual respect. I heard Derek's phone call, Amy, about the power of attorney, about waiting me out. Silence. Long enough that I knew she wasn't going to deny it. He was just talking. He worries about you, we both do. You're 35 years old and your husband has been planning to take control of my finances by establishing that I'm incompetent. That's not worry. That's a strategy. Dad, that's not fair. The letter is fair. $2,400 a month for a house worth $570,000. That's fair. What you've been doing for 3 years is not fair. Pay rent or find somewhere else to live. Those are the options. I hung up, sat in my brother's kitchen, and drank a cup of coffee. He didn't say anything, because he's been my brother for 60 years and knew when I needed quiet. You okay? He finally asked. Getting there, I said. I gave them the 30 days. I wasn't at the house for the first 2 weeks of it. I stayed in Midland, made a few trips to look at properties I'd been eyeing in the hill country west of San Marcos, thought about the next chapter. When I did return to Creekside Lane, I came for my workshop equipment, my personal documents, and about a third of the furniture. I had arrangements made at a furnished rental near downtown Buda, month to month, quiet, mine. My son-in-law met me in the driveway. He'd shed the polish. 3 weeks without the subsidy had worn something off of him, and what was underneath was less charming. This is unnecessary, he said. We can work something out. The letter explained the terms. Have you paid rent? We don't have $2,400 just sitting around. Then you have 2 weeks to make arrangements. Frank, he used my name the way people use a tool when they need leverage. Amy is your daughter. You're willing to make your own daughter homeless over money. I loaded a box of chisels into my truck bed, took my time. You want to talk about what Amy is willing to do to her own father over money? Then we can have that conversation. His jaw tightened. We'll get an attorney. That's your right. Patricia Holloway is mine. You have her number. I drove away. In my rearview mirror, he was still standing in the driveway with his arms crossed, and I realized I'd been watching that posture, that certainty, that assumption that my goodwill was inexhaustible, for 3 years. I didn't feel angry watching it recede in the mirror. I just felt the weight of 3 years lifting, ounce by ounce. The bank called 8 days before the end of the 30-day notice period. A loan officer named Ronald Webb, from Hill Country Community Bank, professional and neutral. He confirmed he'd received my co-signer withdrawal petition and that the re-evaluation of the primary borrower was complete. Without my income and credit history backing the loan, Derek no longer met their lending thresholds. They'd be issuing notice that the remaining balance of $21,400 was either to be paid in full, refinanced with a qualifying co-signer, or the account would enter default proceedings. I thanked him and set the phone down on my workbench. I was building a small side table at the time, cherrywood, tapered legs. The joints had to be precise or the table would wobble. I planed a leg for a few minutes, listening to the shavings curl onto the floor, thinking about cause and effect, about how every joint in a piece of furniture either holds or it doesn't, and no amount of wanting it to hold substitutes for cutting it right in the first place. They hadn't cut anything right, they just assumed my strength would compensate for their weakness indefinitely. On the last day of the notice period, I got a voicemail from an attorney representing Amy and Derek, a man named Gary Tollison, who spoke with the efficiency of someone billing by the minute. He outlined a position that their 3-year occupancy constituted an implied tenancy agreement with grandfathered rights, that my action was retaliatory, that his clients were prepared to contest any eviction filing. I forwarded the voicemail to Patricia. She called that evening. "This is a standard delay tactic," she said. "Texas property law is clear. You gave proper notice. You offered market rate terms. They declined. And there's no written lease establishing any long-term agreement. File the eviction." "File it," I said. "One more thing. His attorney's going to subpoena your recent estate changes. They'll argue you acted in bad faith, made decisions while emotionally compromised. My decisions are documented over 2 years of preparation." The first attorney visit was before I even heard that phone call. A pause. "Then you were very thorough." "I spent 40 years in construction," I said. "I've never built anything without a plan." The court date was 5 weeks out. I spent those weeks finishing the blanket chest, starting a new dining table commission for a neighbor, and visiting a piece of property near Wimberley, 22 acres with a creek, a workshop-sized outbuilding, and a view of cypress trees that looked like something a painter would choose if he was in a generous mood. The asking price was $485,000. I offered $465,000. They countered at $475,000. We agreed. I told Patricia to accelerate the listing timeline on Creekside Lane. "You're selling?" she asked. "They wanted the house. They can watch someone else own it." The listing went up on a Wednesday. By Friday, I had 4 offers. A couple relocating from California, both engineers, offered $585,000 cash with a 30-day close. I accepted. The agent sent me the confirmation while I was sitting in my truck outside a lumber yard in Kyle. I read it twice, did the math, and allowed myself about 30 seconds of satisfaction before I called Patricia. The courthouse in Hayes County was smaller than I expected, more human-scaled. Patricia and I arrived 20 minutes early. Derek and Amy came in with Gary Tollison, who was younger than his phone voice suggested, and carried a briefcase that looked like it was compensating for something. Amy didn't meet my eyes. Derek did, held my gaze about 2 seconds before looking at his attorney. The judge, a man named Clarence Vieth, wore reading glasses on a lanyard and had the patience of someone who'd been watching people make avoidable mistakes for 25 years. He reviewed the filings before he said a word. "Mr. Mercer, this property is yours outright?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Paid off in full in 2019, and the defendants have been residing there for 3 years without a written lease agreement or rental payment." "That's correct. You provided 30 days written notice offering rental terms at below market rate, which they declined." "Yes, Your Honor. Judge Vieth looked at Gary Tolleson over his glasses. Counsel, your position. Tolleson argued implied tenancy, length of occupancy, the father-daughter relationship, equitable consideration. It was delivered well. It didn't have anything underneath it. Patricia responded with the deed, the utility records, the tax assessments, the certified mail receipt from the notice, and 2 years of bank statements showing 0 contributions to household expenses from either defendant. She was measured and precise. She didn't editorialize. Judge Vieth listened, looked through the documents, and asked my son-in-law directly, "Sir, did you or did you not make a statement to the effect that you were waiting for Mr. Mercer to age out of the property so that you could benefit from it?" Derek's attorney started to object. The judge held up a hand. "I'm asking the witness. I may have said something like that, out of context. What context would make that statement appropriate?" No answer came. The ruling took about 4 minutes to deliver. Immediate eviction, 14 days to vacate, all personal property removed by that date or subject to disposal, court costs to the defendants. The gavel came down clean. Amy made a sound that might have been a sob. Derek's jaw was a hard line. Gary Tolleson was already repacking his briefcase. Patricia and I walked out into a Thursday afternoon that smelled like cedar and the exhaust of a passing county truck. The sky was that particular blue that only exists in central Texas in the fall. Deep, crisp, indifferent to human drama. "They'll appeal," she said. "They won't win." "No," she agreed, "they won't." I drove back to my rental, made a sandwich, sat at my small table, the cherry side table I'd finished, sat in the corner, 3 legs precisely tapered, 1 joint I'd had to recut. The table didn't wobble. That still pleased me more than it probably should. My phone had 12 missed calls by evening. I answered only the one from my brother. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Exactly right," I said. "They vacated on the 12th day, not the 14th. I found out from my real estate agent, who'd arranged a pre-closing walkthrough with the buyers. The keys were on the kitchen counter. There was a hole in the drywall of the hallway, head height, fist-sized. There was a message written in permanent marker on the inside of the workshop door, something about what kind of father does this. I photographed it, filed the repair costs with my insurance, and painted over it before the buyers ever saw it. Dr. Kevin Marsh and Dr. Rachel Marsh, both emergency medicine physicians, were in their early 40s and had 3 kids who were already asking about the backyard. Dr. Marsh shook my hand at closing and said, "We're going to take good care of it." I believed him. The escrow check cleared 4 days later. After remaining property costs, I walked away with $541,000. I didn't hear from Amy for 6 weeks. When she finally called on a quiet Sunday, I picked up without hesitating, and this time she didn't lead with an apology. She led with how hard everything had gotten. The motel they'd been staying in, Derek's loan mess, the hit to his credit, the commercial insurance business, which had apparently unraveled completely once the money stopped propping it up. I let her talk without cutting in. When she finally ran out of things to say, I asked her something plainly. "I want to ask you one thing, and I want the real answer. When Derek was on the phone with his brother, talking about power of attorney, about waiting me out for the house, did you know that conversation was happening before you heard it from me?" A long pause. He'd brought it up before, as a maybe. I didn't think he meant it seriously. "But you didn't tell me." Another pause, longer this time. "No." "Okay," I said. "Thank you for actually saying it." "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have told you. I don't even know what I was thinking. I think I wanted 2 things that couldn't both be true. I wanted to stay married to Derek, and I wanted things to be okay with you, and I just never let myself look straight at the part where those 2 things were pulling apart." It was the most honest sentence she'd said to me in 3 years, maybe longer. "I know," I said. "I watched it happen." "Where do we go from here?" I thought about the land in Wimberley, the outbuilding I was slowly turning into a real shop, the cypress trees along the creek, the dining table commission sitting half-finished on my bench, the whole life I was rebuilding one careful piece at a time. I don't know yet, I told her. That's not something you get back with a phone call. It's something you earn back slowly, with actions, not explanations. Is it possible that you'd let me? People can change. I've seen it happen. But I'm done putting myself in a position where I'm just hoping someone will. If you change, I'll see it for myself. She was crying quietly by then. I didn't rush to smooth it over. Some grief has to be earned, and the only decent thing to do is let it run its course. I love you, Dad. I love you too. That's never moved. But loving you isn't the same as trusting you, and it's not the same as giving you access to my life. Both of those you'll have to build back, the same way anything solid gets built, over time, one honest piece at a time. We hung up. I sat for a while in the quiet at Wimberley, listening to the creek move over the rocks in the dark, watching the shop light catch the edge of the walnut planks I had waiting for the next morning. I want to be clear about something, because I think it's the part people tend to misread in stories like mine. None of what I did was revenge. Revenge is a feeling. What I did was structural. I'd spent a lifetime building something solid, load-bearing in all the right places, and I'd let people I loved live inside it without ever putting a hand to the weight of it. Then I'd watch them start acting like they'd built it themselves. All I did was take the blueprint back. Derek filed a civil complaint against me 3 months later, claiming I'd fraudulently withdrawn as co-signer and deliberately damaged his financial standing. A new attorney this time, arguing I'd done it out of personal spite. Patricia answered with 2 years of documented history and a timeline showing my estate planning had started a full 24 months before any of the events Derek was pointing to. The case never made it to a hearing. It got thrown out. His second truck got repossessed that February. I heard about it secondhand, through my brother, the way news travels through Texas families whether you ask for it or not. I didn't feel any satisfaction about the truck. I didn't feel much of anything about it. Those consequences were never mine to carry. They belonged entirely to the choices that caused them. The Wimberley shop came together over that winter. I built a proper French cleat wall, hung every tool where it belonged, put good lighting over the main bench. The first thing I built in the new space was a rocking chair, red oak, steam-bent slats, a gift to myself for no better reason than that I'd always wanted to make one. Took 3 weeks, came out better than I expected. I set it on the front porch of the main house and drank my coffee in it most mornings, watching the cypress trees and the creek and the sky go from dark to grey to gold. My brother drove out in April to help me pour a small concrete pad for an outdoor work area. We spent 2 days on it, mixing, setting the forms, checking the level every few minutes, the same way our father taught us both, decades ago. The first morning, before we got started, he sat in the rocking chair a while, without saying anything. "You did good," he finally said. "Came out pretty even." "I'm not talking about the chair." I handed him a coffee and sat down on the porch steps. The creek was running well after a good rain. A cardinal was making a fuss in the cedar elm at the edge of the yard. I almost didn't do it, I admitted. Part of me kept thinking if I just stayed patient long enough, they'd figure it out on their own. That part was wrong. Yeah, how long did you know it was wrong? I thought about all those nights in the old workshop, the tung oil and sawdust, the slow understanding that had been building in me longer than I'd ever admitted, probably 2 full years before I actually did anything about it. My brother just nodded. "Better late than never. Better early than never would have been better." He laughed. "Well, you're here now. I was. And that was true and solid and load-bearing. Nothing about it was going to shift under me. I was standing on land I'd chosen, doing work I'd chosen, surrounded by things I'd made with my own hands, in a life that was still very much moving forward. The house on Creekside Lane had been a good house. I'd built things inside it that mattered. But somewhere along the way it had turned into someone else's calculation, and I'd stopped being a person living in it and started being a resource being managed. The moment I understood that difference, everything else came into focus fast. Some wood you work with, some you set aside, and you go find a piece that isn't fighting you the whole way through. I picked my coffee back up. The cardinal found whatever it was after and took off. The creek kept moving over the rocks with that sound that never gets old if you grew up in the hill country, which I did, which I'd somehow half forgotten, and which I was, slowly, remembering again. Amy called again a few months after that on a Sunday to tell me she and Derek had separated. She said it plainly, no drama, no asking for anything. He'd moved in with his brother in Houston. She had her own apartment in Austin, was working, paying her own bills, seeing a therapist. She said the word therapy, the way people say something they're a little embarrassed by and a little proud of, both at once. That took some courage, I told her. It took running out of every other option. Doesn't much matter why a person starts. Matters what they do once they've started. We talked for 20 minutes or so about nothing important. The kind of surface conversation that has to happen before the deeper kind can be trusted again. Before she hung up, she said, "I'm not asking you for anything, Dad. I just wanted you to know I'm working on it." "I know," I said. "I can hear it in how you're talking." I didn't bring up the will. Not yet. There'd be time for that conversation if she kept going. If the person she was slowly becoming turned out to be the person I always suspected she had it in her to be. I wasn't dangling an inheritance in front of her like a reward for good behavior. I was just paying attention, the same way a good carpenter pays attention to a piece of wood, watching which way the grain wants to run before deciding whether to work with it or set it aside for good. I went back out to the shop after we hung up. I had a commission waiting. A live-edge walnut coffee table for a couple in San Marcos who'd found me through the local furniture guild. A big slab, beautiful figure running through the grain, the kind of piece that forgives nothing and rewards everything, if you're patient enough to approach it right. I stood at the bench a long time before I made the first cut. That's the part most people never really understand about woodworking, or about most things worth doing properly. The work was never really the cutting. The work is standing there beforehand, looking honestly at what you actually have, understanding what it could become, and being willing to tell the difference between the two. I knew exactly what I had now. Land that was mine. A shop built the way I wanted it built. Work that asked something real of me and gave something real back. A daughter who might, slowly, with time, become someone I could trust with my whole chest again. A brother who'd drive 4 hours just to help pour concrete and ask the right question at the right moment. A rocking chair on my porch, facing the creek. It was enough, more than enough. It was a life, and I had built it myself, board by board, and there was no one left standing anywhere near it who could talk me out of it again. I picked up the marking gauge, set it to the line I'd already planned, and made the first mark on the walnut. The grain ran clean and straight,